Gwegwe Kahnawake Rono, and welcome to another episode of Our Town. We're here in studios today at the Mohawk TV Kahnawake offices, and of course we have a very special guest, Grand Chief Mike Delisle from the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. So how's everything going?
Very good, glad to be here.
This is our first interview of 2014. 2013 seemed like a very big year politically for Kahnawake. There was a lot of things that were going on. In your opinion, what moments stand out for you as the Grand Chief here in Kahnawake, politically speaking?
I think number one, you go all the way back to a year ago, January. It started in December and before that, but the Idle No More movement was very large, not just here in Kahnawake, but across the country. And I'll say, unfortunately, my opinion is that we dropped the ball, not just as Kahnawake, but First Nations people across the country. We had the attention of the federal government. We had the opportunity to do many good things, and I think, again, coming from the December AFN meeting, very little has been accomplished in the past year. So bad on us kind of thing. It's extremely disappointing. I was part of a couple of conference calls during the holidays last year before the January meeting with the Prime Minister and the whole Teresa Spence issue. A lot of publicity surrounding it. I don't think enough political push, and it came down to the fact that the chiefs across the country couldn't agree on a single issue and initiative to bring forward to confront the federal government on. Now we're faced with, I won't steal a couple of other issues that I think were big, but a few other outstanding issues that need to be resolved, some in Kahnawake, some again across the country, but to me that was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, stories of last year politically.
And you know, Mohawk TV went down. We had a meeting with Teresa Spence at the time, and we sat with her and we talked about a few things, and then obviously that went to air last January. But it seemed at the time that the Mohawk Council supported that big meeting that happened with the Prime Minister. Do you feel, looking back now, that it undercut, you know, the Idle No More movement, and was that the right thing to do?
No, I still stand by it, and I don't think it undercut. It actually supported, but because of the dissension of some of the chiefs, Manitoba stands out in my mind, coming forward saying we shouldn't meet with, and the demands of Chief Spence talking about the need for Attorney General, and so on. I mean, at this point, it's not only strength in numbers, but the unification of the issue to say this is what our demands are to the federal government. And to me, I thought it should be one. And it's one that's still staring us in the face today, pending legislative action by the federal government. I'm talking about education. So,
well, what do you think was gained by that meeting? Because now that high treaty process that was, you know, that kind of came out of that meeting is now dead. So what, in your opinion, looking back?
Very little, if anything at all. That's why I say, to me, it was a disappointment. I'm embarrassed based on the fact that we weren't able to come to a conclusion in terms of what issue we should have brought forward. You can't send a letter or make demands in terms of 10 or 12 or 15 outstanding issues. There's a million outstanding issues.
Right.
Some people up north and even in this province are dealing with inadequate housing situations, inadequate water, potable water situation, and so on. I mean, Kahnawake is very different, but we're the few and far between in terms of communities across the country, territories across the country that I won't say are above and beyond, but have the capacity to deal with much larger issues. And we couldn't come to terms with everybody else across the country, and it's hard to get 620, 630 territories to agree on anything, but somebody's got to take the leadership role. You know, again, education is something that's outstanding right now. Somebody needs to put the issues forward, and I think we failed in terms of that. Not Kahnawake specific, across the board.
Do you think that Kahnawake's Idle No More movement is present here? And do you support that? Oh,
I support it. I mean, I marched when they had it in December, leading up to the big protest in Ottawa. I marched in the Ottawa protest as well, myself and Chief Clinton Phillips at the time. They were asking for more buses, and I think there were 8 people from Kahnawake that attended by bus. There were others that brought their own vehicle up and so on, but the contingent was very small compared to other territories, communities that I saw from much further distances than us via Ottawa. So yes, I support it. It needs to be more than just visible, though. There needs to be some concrete actions that are demanded and goals that need to be achieved. You know, it's good to take action, and the name says it all, but I think we're still idle.
What would you change?
in terms of the process.
Yeah, well, in terms of, I don't know more in all the things that had, you know, come out of that meeting with the Prime Minister and the way things have gone throughout the year. What would you have changed? And, you know, under those circumstances, would you have done it again? Would you, you know?
I think it's definitely worth doing again, but we have to try and build consensus around one issue. We're not going to be able to attack the federal government on 10 or 12 issues at that level. When, like I said, we had the Prime Minister's interest, we had the attention of the Canadian government and their parliament to do something. And I think we have that opportunity again, and to me the focus is on education and the First Nation Education Act, the possibility of legislative action there. But to me, that's the focal point. I wouldn't change anything. I'd just try and ensure that we could agree on one issue and move it forward. Once you have them at the table, then you can start talking about some of the other issues, some of the disadvantages, like I mentioned earlier, about housing, water, sewer, whatever else. But they're important to those people, but you have to look at the overall important issue that impacts everybody. Some of the people that are dealing with this education issue, we had a meeting in December in FNEC. I hate to say it this way, but it's the fact they don't have the capacity that Kahnawake does to deal with this type of issue at an FNEC level, at an AFNQL level, at an AFN level, and at a national level. We do, and I think somebody needs to take charge. That's why we sent the letters. And so to me, if I could change anything, it would just be try to refocus people and get their energies in one area.
You know, and of course, you had mentioned education, and it's a huge issue right now. It was in 2013, and it's taken on a whole different, you know, forum at this point in 2014. Looking back, when the whole issue of, you know, finally seemed to come to, you know, when the executive summary, for example, was released regarding the issue surrounding the combined school committee and all of that process seemed to come to a close in 2013. Looking back, do you feel that the suspension of the combined school committee was justified, like after all was said and done?
Oh, I still think so. I mean, those weren't the educational issues I was talking about, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to get into the other,
absolutely, and I'm not sure if it's completely closed. We'll be meeting with Combined Schools Committee, myself and the two portfolio chiefs on Monday to go over, I guess, that report and a couple of letters that they had sent to us in September, October, asking for meetings to, I guess, close the file, so to speak, and move forward. So we'll find out on Monday what directions are, what the strategies are. There's still issues that need to be resolved. The relationship, for one, and rescinding the MCR and going in a different direction. Well, I guess we'll find out on Monday, but much bigger issues in terms of education nationally than internally right now.
Exactly, and I think one of the things, and the reason why I brought that up is definitely not to rehash old wounds or anything like that, but it just, you know, when you look at history and looking at some of the things that Kahnawake has gone through within this community in terms of education, you know, people are questioning, well, how do you come out of a really tough issue like that where there was clearly division? And now you're turning all of your focus, you know, and focus onto combating this whole FNEA, and how do we come back together as a community when there may still be things that are unresolved here? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think focusing on the real issue and the enemy versus the internal problems, squabbles, and/or issues have to be focused on. We can have disagreements. We've had disagreements. We'll continue to have disagreements in probably every avenue of politics in Kahnawake. There will always be some type of division, unfortunately, for the foreseeable future. But we need to focus on where our energies on where the problem is and who the true enemy is. It's not the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. It's not the Combined Schools Committee. It's not whoever's parents are supporting each other. We're under attack by the federal government to reinstitute extremely paternalistic ideals in a law that go all the way back to residential school initiatives. So that's the enemy. That's the problem. That's the focus of the energies right now.
Yeah, and you know, and some people are saying that this whole FNEA Act is kind of like a repeating of history, if you will. Don't go away, though. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more here on Our Town with Mohawk Television. This program has been brought to you by Get & Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to the program. If you're just tuning in, you're watching Our Town, and today's guest in studio is Grand Chief Mike Delisle from the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. Before we went to break, we were discussing the education issues more at a national level, though, with the FNEA Act coming out last year, and a lot of controversy surrounding, the legislation or and some of the meaning in this act, and people trying to interpret it, and what does this mean, from your point of view, and is it a good or bad thing for Kahnawake and the rest of the country?
I think saying it's a bad thing is an extreme understatement. I think it's one of the worst attempts at control over First Nations future that I've seen since I've been in council. So it's more than bad. There's a lot of initiatives right now that are taking place to try and stop it. I'm involved in the file, obviously, because it takes our attention, and somebody needed to carry our words forward. Just to go back to December, a lot of activity happened in that month, and in November as well. We signed off on a letter. Well, I signed off on a letter on behalf of council and the community addressed to the Prime Minister, unequivocally stating that you must stop this process. They need to withdraw it for all of the reasons. It's a couple of pages long. It's posted on the website. If you'd like to take a look at it, it's there. Extremely strong, supported by a unanimously signed council resolution, going into some of those other details as well. In the first week of December, I attended a First Nation Education Council, FNEC, meeting of AFNQL chiefs, Assembly First Nation, Quebec and Labrador, in Saint-Sauveur for the day. Very productive meeting. Chief Gilbert White Duck out of Kittigan-Zibi, Kahnawake, as people know it, is the lead on the file from the Quebec Chiefs Assembly, as well as part of the working group at the national level, AFN. We've had a good relationship with Gilbert and KZ for years, so they got a hold of our letter. They knew Kahnawak's position very strong and supported that as well. So he led the charge at the FNEC meeting. We were able to, again, come up with a stronger position and direction out of the Quebec Chiefs, because it was strong, and there's been legal reviews. It was a very productive meeting, like I said, but a better position was put forward. People from the Combined Schools Committee and the internal working group on the actions against the FNEA were there and supported our words and our actions, so it was very good. From there, moving forward, we went to the AFN meeting, Assembly First Nations Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa. The week after that, Lloyd Phillips and I, again, to ensure, number one, there was representation from Kahnawake, and number two, that our words and actions would be heard, and hopefully change the position in what we considered a very weak position from chiefs nationally by resolution. So again, Gilbert's part of the working group. I attended the working group meeting from 1 to 5 o'clock or so that Monday afternoon, and again got resounding support from the chiefs that were there, not hundreds, but a few, and the working group to say, it needs to be an outright rejection. It can't be a partnership. It can't be working with the federal government on the possibilities of. It needs to be outright rejected. And the resolution that had been drafted and was put forward to be read for Assembly the Wednesday, again, in our opinion, was very weak. So success on Monday. Wednesday, when it came to the floor, after Chief Spence had some time at the podium and various presentations on different facets of education. When the resolution came forward, we had our action plan in place. Gilbert spoke first, I spoke second, and we knew that something was happening behind the scenes, because the proposer and the seconder of the resolution had been very active in the morning. This was about 11 o'clock when it finally got tabled for Assembly. But all through the morning, Chief Skokumum came to me and welcomed me, and I don't attend AFN assemblies very often, and I don't know him personally, but we know each other. And the seconder is as well, who's a proxy, were working feverishly to do something. So I think they got word from the working group and/or Gilbert that we were going to propose that there be a severe wording change to resolution. So ultimately, it happened. Gilbert spoke. I spoke at the podium. Apparently, it made it to CPAC. Joe Delarone saw it in Ottawa over the holidays. So we had the impact that we went there for. The resolution was changed, not exactly the way we would like to have seen it, but again, our message was delivered strongly and clearly, and we came out of there with a much stronger position across the country than we went in there on Wednesday. So
right, and I think that was a really big worry for a lot of people, was that, you know, a lot of the territories across the country wouldn't be on board with each other, that there would be some who didn't think it was as harmful as maybe the next. So, you know, when we look at where do we stand on this issue now, here in 2014, a lot of people are asking, well, where do we go from here? What is happening with this FNEA, and you know, is the Prime Minister's office hearing us that we do not want this implemented, you know, in Kahnawake and anywhere else?
I believe they absolutely have heard it, and there were indications even before the FNEC meeting and the National Assembly in Ottawa. The Monday before the Tuesday meeting in Saint-Sauveur, I received by email a letter message by Luc Dumont, the Regional Director General out of Quebec City, stating that they're looking to extend the consultation phase of FNEA up until March 31st, when all indications were that this would hit the parliamentary floor sometime now, you know, mid to late January, when they came back into session. That apparently is not the plan now. We're hearing rumblings that they are going to do something in terms of an announcement saying either it's being extended and or set aside for the moment, but we don't have anything official in terms of that. But I believe they are listening. That issue of Luc Dumont sending it not just to me, but to all of the chiefs across the country. We've asked First Nation Education Council to send an advice to all of at least Quebec chiefs for a start. And I asked in Ottawa as well, federally, nationally while I was at the table, to send an advice to all of the communities to say, don't bite. Don't reject it, but don't go individually.
Right.
Let's do it either as a region, either by province, or if we can get our ducks in order nationally and address it in a formal, if they want to say consultation, we'll say accommodation forum, to have our voice heard, instead of them picking and choosing and picking away at some of the other, I won't say less fortunate, but less capacity First Nation territories in Quebec and or across the country, and say, we've consulted with them, this is the plan that we've adopted, and therefore we're moving forward. Because even in Assembly, we had heard back on the Tuesday that there was a protest on the Hill, and there was only about approximately 40 people there protesting the FNEA, and Parliament was conducting their sessions as well, and Minister Valcourt, Minister of Indian Affairs, stood up and said, well, there's not lots of noise outside, there's only about 40 people, so I guess our plan is in motion. People aren't taking us to task, and we'll continue to move forward. That was reported back to chiefs in Assembly that Wednesday, and I think that was a driving force in terms of us getting that stronger position moved forward. So there are things that are continuing to happen. FNEC needs to get a little bit more proactive in terms of their relationship, not just here, but across the country. Lise Bastien, the director, was in Ottawa. So there's a lot of momentum and a lot of things happening. We're going to ensure that the momentum gets maintained. Myself, Chief Gilbert White Duck, and others are going to ensure that this thing doesn't fall off the table and maintain the attention of the federal government.
I mean, and I think people, you know, expect that. And also the fact that here in Kahnawake, there's obviously a strong presence, you know, coming forward of people in the community who are saying, we do not need this. We have our own constitution in place, something that has existed for more than 30 years. You know, the community has stood up for this and created this school education system, and, you know, we're not going to take this lying down. And I mean, what happens in your worst case scenario if, you know, after all is said and done, and the consultation process that, you know, is supposed to be happening with First Nations communities across the country, you know, they just end up saying, well, we're going to do what we're going to do anyways, and you're going to accept this. Where do we go from there? Well,
it would be even a tougher fight, because as community is well aware, I mean, the 10 million plus that we receive in educational funding every year comes from the federal government. They can't dictate to us how education gets dispersed, for lack of a better term, in the community, but they definitely have a big fiscal say. So it would be a huge fight. I don't think we can afford to do it on our own at this point. Education being one of the priorities that Council has identified over the past year and a half or so. I don't have an answer on what the next step would be, because the minister had stated months ago now, though, saying, well, if you don't want this, then it's status quo. But status quo isn't acceptable either. They're looking at funding cuts. They're looking at all types of initiatives that are not in favor of First Nation education across the country. So There are plans. There has been a plan regionally for years now that
Right.
hasn't been implemented for lack of funding and lack of recognition at a federal level. Maybe we have to deal exclusively with provincial authorities, which isn't the best way to do things either. But we can't allow them to just run roughshod over the education system and or hand it down to a provincial authority, which we won't agree with. So plans are in place, actions are still taking place. I don't think they're being able to do what their initial plan was 2 years ago with First Nation education. So we'll see. The next, I would say, 3 to 4 months are key in terms of maintaining that attention.
And of course, here in Kahnawake, people are definitely encouraged to get involved and take action. And I believe that there's a great deal of people who are invested in this issue. So don't go away. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Right now, here you're watching Mohawk TV. This program has been brought to you by Get and Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to the program. Thanks for tuning in. Before we left for break, we were discussing the FNEA Act and where we are with that, and of course the effects it's having across Canada, not only here in Kahnawake. But one of the things that has developed over the holidays is that Kahnawake, the Working Group on Education, there was a finalization of the position paper from Kahnawake, and now there's signatures that are needed on this. There's one at Cafe Delisle, there's one at the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, the Education Center, various locations in the community where you can go and sign and support the action that is being taken here in Kahnawake. So moving on, of course, there has been a lot of talk out in the community about the Mohawk Council's organizational review. We've been hearing about this over the years. But one of the things recently that there was a release that came out of the Mohawk Council was a new executive team in place that consists of Alana Rice, Paul Rice, Kevin Kennedy, and Richard Basque. Right. What is the, mission of the executive team, if you will? It's
to ensure that the continuous production of Kahnawake is maintained. And what I mean by production is that we're obviously in a financial, I won't say crisis, but crunch right now. Not only because federal government is pushing hard in First Nation direction, but also internally we've grown over the past 30 years to be a workforce of over 300 people. We need to ensure that services to the community are maintained at their highest levels. We've seen initiatives recently of scaling back door-to-door pickup for household recycle. There's going to be impacts. So the job descriptions for the executive director, for the a new position, executive strategic officer, as well as the financial officer, and Kevin's position have been completely redrafted to ensure there's not only collaboration at that level, but collaboration at the table as well. This has been an ongoing issue as long as I've been there about the separation between administration, finance, and politics. We're trying to put that together because of the not only org review, but the comprehensive financial plan that was launched last year as well. We're in the first year of it, so to speak. There are going to be initiatives that will be announced through community as well that don't have an impact necessarily on the everyday individual in the community, but long-term impact could be something that people need to be aware of. So the team's mission is to ensure that there is collaboration, not only in finance and administration at the executive level, but throughout the entire organization, but also in concert with Chief and Council. Our priorities, which are pretty much finalized at this point, the work plans being put in place. How do we accomplish these things in light of financial constraints, administrative constraints, human resource constraints? What is realistic? What is really achievable? As well as maintaining, I won't say status quo, but the services that the community has been accustomed to over the course of the last 25, 30 years. So huge task. Two, I'll say completely new positions. One absolutely new in terms of the strategic officer, but the financial officer as well. It used to be finance and administration. It was very an administrative role. Now Paul's job is to look at things like Continent 8 and MIT and our relationship with Dewa and Izakta. How are we generating revenue for the community, not MCK or Dewa? Those types of initiatives.
Right.
He's going to eventually be involved probably in the senior REIT process because we borrowed money to negotiate. We're getting closer and closer to a package to be presented to the community for settlement. How does that get played out in whether it's hundreds of millions of dollars, including a land component, so on and so forth. So all of these types of things will be dovetailed as we move forward. And I'm very encouraged by the change in not only job description, because I don't hear a lot of people say it's not in my job description, but at an executive level, people can't be held down by the day-to-day fires. You know, like chief and council, for an example, as well. You know, we deal with a lot of the flavor of the week, flavor of the month,
Right,
depending on what has happened, you know, around the community, and rightly so. I mean, we're supposed to be in charge of this community as well, administratively, governance-wise, and so on. So that has to happen. But for people to knock on the doors of whether it's myself, other chiefs on council, the executive director, and say, got a minute on something that really we shouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
The directors
That's
and
more
managers.
administrative.
Exactly.
More,
And the directors and managers that we have in place, and the org review is going to be going into all levels, you know, from top to bottom, and exactly that
Where
top
are you
to
guys
bottom.
at with your organizational review? Should it be complete by
Well,
April? Or?
we were hoping to have everything done by April, but because we've only put the executive people in place as of just before the holidays, with Richard being the last component, it's a continuing process. I won't say it's finished or not finished, but I could see it in terms of evaluating everyone's job, because that's what's happening now, and the responsibilities and the ability for them to be able to manage and or direct and contribute possibly in other ways as well throughout the organization will probably take the better course of another 18 months. But you could say that the initial org review plan is finalized and it's being implemented. So it's action now. Things are actually happening.
Right. I know that there's a lot of discussion or talk, if you will, about the Mohawk Council having to cut jobs, that there would be a lot of layoffs coming and jobs cut in the near future. Is that true? Or
no, that's not true at all. We held a large gathering with all of the employees at the Knights of Columbus in the fall, early winter, trying to explain what comprehensive financial plan, organizational review, and council priorities had to do with them. You know, the laborers in the community, the soldiers at the front desk, the administrators, and everybody else. I mean, it was a pretty full hall, and very good questions were asked of us. But that was the initial message, is that don't fear for your job. Try and see how you can contribute better to the community to enhance your job. So there have been no layoffs. We're not anticipating minimal or mass layoffs in the near future, but every job is being evaluated at this point, again, to better service community and to ensure that everyone's getting the best bang for the buck, so to speak. So no, the rumor mill about mass layoffs or job cuts and so on isn't the fact. Can it happen in the future? Absolutely. I mean, look at the government cuts across the board, you know, in federal and or provincial. It's happened at administrative levels. Look at the economy as it is today, and it's happening in the business world too. So
yes.
Nobody's, I guess...
safe?
No, I won't say safe,
Right.
but I mean, for lack of a better term, safe. There's no such thing as a guarantee the rest of your life in terms of a job.
Right.
And everything's being evaluated, including benefits and services internally, you know, like pensions, like bonuses based on performance and so on. So all of those types of things are being evaluated today. And it's a work in progress. It's grown in the last 30 years, and it's time for sure.
And you know, I think one of the reasons why I ask major job cuts are coming when you look at the structure of the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake and all the services that are offered out into the community. What does that mean for the community, you know, at large, if you have less workers and you're already seeing it with certain things? And I don't even know if there was any truth to this, but you know, for example, the recycling, you know, the pickup and that was just downsized, and now they're saying that those recycling jobs will no longer exist because the people who pick up the garbage will now be expected to pick up the recycling too.
Right now, like I said, every service is being evaluated, not just jobs. We don't know, but we're trying to do as much cost saving as can be. Recycling is an example. There weren't layoffs. I can't give you the number of people that work there, but many of them are on employment enhancement program through social assistance on a revolving basis to maintain jobs, so to speak, and to lessen the financial burden on operations, because we're talking upwards of $500,000, 400,000 plus for door-to-door recycling in the operation, and we don't get a penny for it. It was born in the late 80s out of a pilot project from the federal government for I think a year or 18-month program, and once the community got used to it, how do you take it back? Now it's grown to, like I said, almost $500,000 without a penny coming in from federal government.
Why is that, though? I mean, where does the recycling go? Because, I mean, recycling can be worth money. So where does it go?
It's not worth that much. It's not worth as much as you would think. On a huge scale, you know, for some of the people where we deliver it to, who take it from us and Chateauguay and probably 10 other municipalities, based on volume, they make it a business. But internally, the return on what we pick up and give in glass and aluminum and paper and so on is minimal. It doesn't really have an impact in terms of overall budget.
Okay. So I guess this organizational review, we'll be hearing more about it as the months
It's a continuing story, and like I said, you know, I can't give an exact time frame. I'll say at this point, the initial review is over. Jobs and reviews have been implemented starting at executive level. We'll be moving forward in directors, managers, and so on. So it'll be an ongoing story for Kahnawake for at least the next year and a half.
Great. And we will keep you, the community, posted. But don't go away. We're going to take a quick commercial break right now. You're watching Mohawk TV. This program has been brought to you by Get & Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming. And welcome back to the show. You're joining us in studio today here at the Kahnawake Mohawk television offices. And of course, we have Grand Chief Mike Delisle in studio, and we are discussing some pretty heavy topics. But moving on, over the holidays, there was an announcement made again about the 11 gas retailers who were recently in a court lawsuit. A decision came down through that process. What is the Mohawk Council's take on this? Because obviously now, you know, that decision could be detrimental to our tax status.
From reading it, and it's extremely lengthy. First it was only in French, but we do have an English copy. We don't believe that it's detrimental to the individual and or collective tax benefit status right now, tax exemption status. It's obviously detrimental for those who have read it, to the retailers who filed the class action suit. We weren't part of it. We had been asked by them not to participate as interveners or so on. We did send lawyers towards the end to have an understanding of where this was coming, and the judgment took months, I think 6 or so, when the trial ended either in May or June, and finally came down with their opinion in early December or late November.
Right.
It's negative for sure in terms of the type of lawsuit that they filed against against Revenue Quebec. The judge obviously found in favor of Revenue Quebec and that they must remit taxes. And it goes, I guess, to the fact that contracts had been signed. Assessments have been made all the way back to 1993 based on that. And as gas had continued to be delivered to these, assessments don't go away. Anybody who's worked in the United States and understands what the IRS is about and does, those things don't just go away. They continue to either accrue, accumulate interest, and so on. So they fought based on inherent right, citing Magna Carta positions and so on, and the court didn't recognize that based on the fact that, again, like I said, that they've signed contracts to the effect that they will remit. So we haven't put a position out. We've yet to discuss it at the table. We're waiting for legal to complete their analysis and bring forward the opinion to say this is what we should say or shouldn't say publicly or in any case to community. But overall, it doesn't look like it's detrimental to collective right. And that was our overall concern from day one.
Right.
We understood that, and you know council's position, the community knows council's position in terms of point of sale exemptions, and we should be exempt completely from any taxes on reserve as First Nations people, not anyone else, just us kind of thing. And I think that's the beginning of the debate. So we'll see how this plays out. I know that they've launched an appeal as well. So we really can't say too much other than that. We're not speaking on their behalf. We never have and won't. But in terms of our rights, we don't think that they're in jeopardy based on the decision by the provincial court.
And I think people needed to hear that because, you know, there was a lot of talk about their defense using some of the inherent right and going back as far as proclamation and things like that, that, you know, had some people fearful in terms of that decision that was rendered in December. Well, if they can do that here, what's not to say that they could apply that in other tax issues or rights that we have here in Kahnawake?
Sure.
So, of course, you know, it's you know, some people may feel better by hearing that.
And I mean, like I said, that was our initial concern. And we've done internal legal review based on what their petition to the court was. And if we felt, even though they said, you know, they'd rather us not be an intervener, if we felt that there was at any point in time that at stake, we absolutely would have taken action, because we can't leave it to a provincial court or a federal court or the Supreme Court, because that's not where rights are born. That's not where they should be fought, in our opinion. So it is what it is at this point.
Okay. You know, one of the things that I noticed here in Kahnawake, probably for the last, you know, 11, 12 years covering politics, is the different relationships or factions within the community. You know, one of the questions that I always wanted to ask you, I may have brought it up on prior shows, is the relationship between the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake and the Longhouses. Over the years, you know, reporting, you definitely see, you know, those difference of opinions and those staunch positions coming forward. But last year there were some very, I guess if you will, you know, hard lines being taken by the Confederacy and the Grand Council by, you know, by sending those letters out to all of the band councils across Indian country, saying, you know, you cannot use these symbols, you cannot refer to these treaties and things like that. Where do you stand now, not you particularly, but the Mohawk Council, in terms of their relationship here in Kahnawake with the Longhouses? Has there been any sort of reach out from the Mohawk Council to say, you know, we want to try and mend this relationship, or, you know, let's do a meeting? Like, where do things stand at this point?
Right now, there hasn't been any olive branch, any extension, any invitation, or so on. In the past, it's been very difficult to sit down and discuss some of these types of things. They brought up, like you said, the issues again recently of the points of jurisdiction and how we cannot delve into some of these. It's one of the council priorities, again, like I said, that earlier was identified over the course of the last year or so, called internal relationships. There's another one called external relationships, and that has to deal more with the federal government, but internally as well. So we don't have the action plan to say, where should we start kind of thing, but membership might be a good one. There's a few others. We've obviously had some interaction, I'll say, on the education file, but no real meaningful dialogue. We've tried in the past, they've tried in the past, we've had sit down before I was there, while I was there. The relationship is strained for sure, for some obvious reasons, maybe some others as well that I'm not aware of.
Is it really over the points of jurisdiction, or is it just attitudes? Like, how do you see it?
Well, personalities, I'm sure over the years, decades have played roles. I know that past council members and or chiefs have become callous towards any type of possible mending of the fences, so to speak. I'm not there. I think we are all Mohawk people living here in Kahnawake, and everybody has a right to distinguish themselves that way. I'm not trying to say one body faction can be sanctioned or shouldn't be. Just like I said earlier, on a national level, we need to identify who the enemy is, and I'm sorry, I'm not, and I don't think we are. We understand the role. You know, Joe used to say, he's not the chief, he's just keeping the seat warm. Guilty. But I mean, who's going to bring some of those issues to the national level? I know that there's work being done at an international level. I know there's work being done at a national level. What's happening here internally? You know, we've asked questions in the past. Well, if the relationship is to grow or somehow be maintained, and again, for example, membership, what's the nation's position? How does that fold out into Kahnawake? Because I'm selfish. I want to know about us first before all of our brother and sister communities and or confederacy and nation. I know it's obviously and has to be intertwined, but I want to know the impact here in Kahnawake. So I'm open to, like I said, it's been identified as a priority. Chiefs will be working on a plan on how and what the subject matters would be to reach out again, if you will. It's just not there yet. So we met this morning on it, not that one specific issue, but council priorities. So there will be something coming forward. I don't know what shape or form it's going to take. I hope to be able to play a role. We need to work together, and we've seen things in the past crumble because we haven't. You know, passports, border cross, you know, some of those larger issues.
And the points of jurisdiction.
We've said we can't do this, although we attempted. Fine, and let the Confederacy deal with this. But I just don't see how those things relate back to the community, you know, on the ground running, so to speak. I'm looking for those kind of answers, and not for them to step forward and say, these are the answers. I think they need to be done mutually and communally, because it's not only me asking these types of questions. There's a lot of people in the community that are in the dark in terms of how that plays out in Kahnawake.
And you know, one of the reasons why I bring it up again is because I know that, you know, in the fall we had Kenneth Deere, you know, on the show, and we asked him the same question in terms of where is the relationship at, you know, and he had come back with, well, it seems that, you know, it's the Mohawk Council that doesn't want to meet. They always kind of put it back to the Mohawk Council doesn't want to meet, or they don't want to, you know, they're holding up the process, or there's a lot of issues with the Confederacy and those points of jurisdiction. So what is, you know, where do you go from here? I mean, although those issues are relevant, I mean, at some point, you know, are you saying that you are open to meeting with the Longhouses?
Oh, I think so. I think so, depending on, again, what it is we're going to talk about, because I've done it twice. I've done it privately, requested by them on a specific issue. We've done it as a council. It's been years now since the last time we did meet, but it always turns into, you know, a less than discussion. You know, maybe it has to start at a smaller level. Maybe it's a one-on-one. Maybe it's a 3-on-3 instead of, you know, this larger group that becomes emotional. And like I said, I'm not the enemy. We're not the enemy. I understand my role, but somebody has to have a voice. So whether we represent the 1,200, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 that vote, I mean, I take my job seriously, and I think we have a role to play, recognized or unrecognized. And I think they have a role to play as well, depending on what level of leadership we're talking about here.
Okay, well, thank you for your honesty. We're going to wrap up the show, but before we leave, you know, 2014, we're at the beginning of a new year. What do you feel are some of the major issues that Kahnawake is looking at and dealing with this year?
First one is staring in the face. Next Tuesday, there'll be a meeting on the proposed Justice Act.
Yes.
And there's a good beginning of maybe a renewed relationship between traditional and MCK, if you will, because they've said don't participate in the process. The numbers have been extremely low. I blame that on complacency, not anybody else or any directive from any body in the community. But it's a huge challenge. We're talking about Big J in terms of jurisdiction and trying to get our foot in the door and out there and have a true Justice Act and Court of Kahnawake established for the benefit of Kahnawake. There's going to be a lot of work done when it's passed, if it's passed, hopefully, with provincial and federal authorities and maybe other authorities as well to recognize it. Huge piece of work. Senior-y, I won't say is coming to conclusion, but we've taken big steps in 2013 in getting the Canadian government to realize what it's going to take to settle this formally and finally with us. I hope to have lots more to report in the coming months. I'll give you one example. it's always been an issue in terms of a land component, and through the 2 consultations that we've had in the community has said unequivocally again, lands, money is secondary. We finally got Canada to agree that a land component will be part of the senior resettlement when it happens. I think that's huge. It's a huge turnaround from specific claim policy that we're negotiating under and the doctrines and dictates of the federal government. So we're getting closer in terms of that. So I hope to have a package in front of the community for ratification before the term ends. It's not completely in my control. Federal government will be going into an election probably sometime in 2015, so that may have a bearing on how close we can get, but we're getting a lot closer. Community is going to have to become educated and immersed because this thing is hugely complex, over 300 years old. Many things that need to be addressed, like beneficiary status, ratification.
And you want people to have an input so they feel
they
that
absolutely have to. And
justified
again, that's not,
in this decision.
That's another thing that's not in our control. Informed, free and informed consent, and that ratification threshold number of 50%, double majority, 50% plus 1 have to vote and 50% plus 1 have to agree. And again, not that I'm in agreement with, but Canada says that's the Federalists. So we're talking 10,000 plus people of age of majority, you know, less than 10,000. But so there's all those types of things that community needs to get educated on and understanding when we're able to look at this. And I won't say if, when we're able to look at this comprehensive package, because it will be comprehensive. So those are the 2 big things that I see in front of the community for 2014.
Along with education.
Education, I think we're going to win. It's a huge issue, but like I said, I've started to see the federal government kind of step back a bit. It's a big issue and it's the foundation. I think we're going to win that one. I don't have an issue saying that today because I've seen some of the progress made, and if we can continue to remain unified on this at a national level, there's no way they're going to be able to beat us on it.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. And of course, we discussed a lot on the program today, and there's always seems like there's never enough time. Lots of things happening here in Kahnawake. And of course, Mohawk TV will always try to keep you posted. You can also tune in and catch things on www.kahnawake411.com, which is updated almost daily. And if you have any comments or questions, you can email us here at mohawktv@hotmail.com, or even if you have questions for Mike Delisle, you can email him at mike.delisle@mck.ca. We hope you enjoyed the program, and thanks for staying with us, and we'll see you again real soon. Anna.
Kanya ke haga thadi adaraste kayerniga yadu zawaderodu.
This program has been brought to you by Get and Go, a proud sponsor of Mohawk TV programming.